There are moments in your life that act as geological markers, separating one era from the next. They are rarely the loud, seismic events you expect. They do not arrive with trumpets and declarations. Instead, they come disguised as something ordinary. A Tuesday night, a half-empty glass of water on a nightstand, a sentence spoken in the quiet dark. They are the moments when the entire landscape of your world tilts on a silent axis. And when you look up, the stars are all in different places. For me, that moment was a whisper, a casual, self-assured wound delivered in the space between one breath and the next. It was the sound of a door being locked and bolted from the other side, a door I hadn't even realized I'd been waiting in front of for years. It began, as it so often did, with the weight of him. Liam had this way of occupying space, not with noise or aggression, but with a kind of gravitational pull. He was the sun, and the rest of us, myself included, were just planets caught in his orbit, content to circle his warmth. That night, he was a collapsed star, his usual bright energy dimmed to a low, flickering ember. He was lying beside me in my bed, a place that had slowly, imperceptibly, become a shared territory over the past few months. He was on his back, staring at the ceiling where the shadows from the streetlights danced a slow, mournful waltz. I was on my side, facing him, cataloging the familiar map of his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the slight bump on the bridge of his nose from a poolside slip in high school, the way his eyelashes cast impossibly long shadows on his cheeks. We were silent, but it was a specific kind of silence. Not the comfortable, easy quiet that had defined our friendship for a decade, but something heavier, something thick with unspoken anxieties. It was the silence of a held breath, of a question hanging unanswered in the air. For weeks, this had been our ritual. After his world had been spectacularly upended by Sarah's departure, my room had become his sanctuary. It started with him just appearing in my doorway, leaning against the frame like a ghost, his shoulders slumped. Then, he was sitting on the edge of my bed, talking in low murmurs about nothing and everything. Soon after, he was lying on top of the covers, fully clothed, a solid, warm line of misery parallel to my own. And finally, inevitably, he had slipped under the covers, his back a rigid wall against mine, a silent, desperate plea not to be alone. I never questioned it. I just made space, a quiet accommodation that felt as natural and as necessary as breathing. Tonight was different. He'd turned to face me, the usual wall of his back gone, leaving the space between us charged with a new and terrifying potential. His eyes, usually a bright, clear blue, were clouded over, lost in some distant sea of thought. He was talking about her, about Sarah, about how he missed the simple comfort of having someone there, the physical fact of another person in the dark. He spoke of it like a phantom limb, an ache for something that was no longer attached to him. I listened, my heart a dull, heavy stone in my chest, performing the role I had always performed. Ethan, the steady shore against which the turbulent tides of Liam's life could crash and recede. "It's just easy with you, you know," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep and sorrow. He shifted, the mattress dipping with his weight, bringing him infinitesimally closer. My entire nervous system went on high alert. I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, could smell the faint scent of his soap and the day's exhaustion on him. I don't have to pretend. I don't have to be anything. I can just be here. He let out a long, slow breath, a sound of weary surrender. My own breath was trapped in my lungs, a prisoner of hope and fear. This was the precipice. This was the moment where the air thinned, where one wrong step could send everything plummeting into a canyon of regret. And then he said it. The words were soft, almost an afterthought, a piece of casual, conversational shrapnel. It's weird. It's like the best parts of having someone. Without any of the pressure, a small, humorless laugh escaped him. I mean, obviously. He paused, and his eyes finally met mine in the dim light, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths before it was shuttered away. I could never kiss you. We're friends. But it's nice. This is nice. I could never kiss you. The sentence landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't meant to be. That was the most painful part. It was a statement of fact, a law of our universe as he understood it. He was straight. I was his best friend. The idea was so impossible to him it could be stated aloud, used as a point of comparison to illustrate the safety of our bond. For him, it was a confirmation of our friendship's boundaries. For me, it was the sound of a final, heavy door slamming shut in the deepest, most secret corridor of my heart. In that moment, something inside me, some patient, long-suffering creature that had been living on scraps of hope for a decade, finally broke. It was a quiet, internal shattering, a fine web of cracks spreading through everything I thought I knew about us. The air in my lungs rushed out, and I looked at him, at this beautiful, broken man who had just unknowingly annihilated me, and all I could think was, oh, you have no idea. We met our freshman year of college, thrown together by the arbitrary algorithm of university housing and the shared, chlorine-scented world of the swim team. I was there on an academic scholarship with a swimming supplement, a quiet, observant kid from a small town who used his camera lens as a shield between himself and the world. Liam was the opposite. He was a force of nature, a scholarship athlete with a scholarship personality. All bright, easy smiles and a confidence that seemed as natural to him as breathing. He was a sprinter, all explosive power and raw energy. His races a chaotic, beautiful frenzy of churning water that was over in less than a minute. I was a distance swimmer, built for endurance, for the long, meditative rhythm of lap after lap, finding a strange peace in the burn of my muscles and the muffled silence beneath the surface. We were, in every conceivable way, a study in contrasts. Our friendship shouldn't have worked. He was the center of every party, the easy laugh in every conversation, while I was the guy in the corner, watching, documenting. But Liam had a way of seeing past the quiet exterior. He seemed to understand that my silence wasn't born of disinterest, but of attention. He'd find me after a meet, while everyone else was celebrating loudly, and sit beside me on the cold tile of the locker room bench. He wouldn't push me to talk. He'd just sit, dripping and exhausted, and the silence between us would be as full and comfortable as any conversation. He saw the person behind the camera, and for that, I would have followed him anywhere. My feelings for him didn't arrive in a sudden, blinding flash. It was a slow development, like a photograph emerging in a darkroom bath. At first, it was just admiration, a deep and abiding affection for this person who had so effortlessly claimed a space in my life. I loved his loyalty, the fierce, protective way he stood up for his friends. I loved his laugh, a loud, uninhibited bark that could fill a room. I loved the moments of surprising vulnerability he would show only to me. Late-night anxieties about his major, quiet confessions of family pressure, the furrow in his brow when he was genuinely trying to understand one of my esoteric art house films. The shift from friendship to something more was imperceptible at first. It was in the way my breath would catch when he'd emerge from the pool, water streaming down his powerful shoulders. It was in the lingering warmth on my skin where his arm had brushed against mine. It was in the jealous pang I felt when he started dating Jessica in our sophomore year, a feeling I quickly and expertly buried under layers of performative best friend support. I became an expert at emotional archaeology, excavating my own feelings only in the dead of night, in the privacy of my own mind, and then carefully reburying them before the sun rose. To love Liam was to accept that it would be a silent, solitary endeavor. It was a love that was designed to exist in the margins, in the unspoken spaces between us. It was a language only I could speak, and only to myself. Our apartment after college was a natural extension of our dorm rooms. We found a small 2-bedroom place with thin walls and a temperamental radiator, and it became our shared world. He was a software engineer, working long, stressful hours for a tech startup, chasing deadlines and wrestling with code. I was trying to make a go of it as a freelance photographer, shooting weddings and local events, spending my free hours wandering the city with my camera, trying to capture the quiet poetry of everyday life. Our lives were divergent, yet they always converged back in that apartment. It was our anchor. The geography of our domesticity was deeply ingrained. He was chaos, I was order. His perpetually damp towel lived on his bedroom floor. My towels were always folded. His side of the fridge was a precarious Jenga tower of takeout containers and energy drinks. Mine was a neat grid of Tupperware and vegetables. Yet, our routines meshed perfectly. He made the coffee in the morning, strong and black, because he was always up first, his mind already churning with algorithms and user interfaces. I cooked dinner most nights because I found a meditative calm in the chopping and stirring, and left to his own devices, he would subsist entirely on pizza and protein bars. We existed in a state of easy, symbiotic balance. He brought women home, and I learned to make myself scarce. I'd hear the murmur of their voices through the wall, the sound of a laugh that wasn't mine, and I would put on my headphones, turning up the volume until the world was reduced to the melancholic strum of a guitar. I would smile and be polite in the morning, asking Sarah or Emily or Chloe if they wanted coffee, playing my part. I was Ethan, Liam's cool, artistic roommate, his best friend. The role was so well rehearsed it felt like a second skin. They saw me as safe, as a permanent, non-threatening fixture in Liam's life, like a comfortable old armchair. And in a way, they were right. I was permanent. I was safe. And I was utterly, hopelessly, in love with the man they were sleeping with. Each one was a fresh cut, a new reminder of the fundamental, uncrossable chasm that separated us. I'd watch him with them, watch him perform the role of the attentive boyfriend, and I'd see the subtle ways it didn't quite fit. He was trying, always trying, but there was a part of him he held back, a core of restlessness they could never quite soothe. Sarah was different. She lasted longer than the others. 3 years. She was smart and funny, and she seemed to genuinely understand him, or at least, she came closer than anyone else had. She made an effort with me, asking about my photography, remembering the names of my clients. I think, on some level, she recognized the importance of my place in Liam's life and knew that to truly have him, she had to be accepted into our strange little two-person ecosystem. I tried to like her. I truly did. But liking her felt like a betrayal of myself. It felt like applauding the person who was living my dream. So I maintained a friendly, polite distance, a carefully constructed wall of pleasantries. When Liam announced they were moving in together, that he would be leaving our apartment, I felt the floor drop out from under me. I smiled. I hugged him. I told him how happy I was for him. Every word was a lie. Every word was a shard of glass in my throat. The universe, however, had other plans. 6 months into their shared lease, it all fell apart. I only ever got Liam's side of the story, a fractured, confused narrative delivered over several bottles of whiskey on my couch the night he came back. He didn't even call. He just showed up at the door, 2 duffel bags at his feet, his face pale and drawn. He said she felt like he was never really there, that even when he was sitting next to her, some essential part of him was a million miles away. She said it felt like I was always waiting for something. He'd slurred, staring into his glass. But I don't even know what it's supposed to be. I knew what it was. It was the restlessness I'd always seen in him, the quiet hum of dissatisfaction that no one else seemed to notice. He was a ship built for a vast ocean, and he kept trying to dock in small, quiet harbors. He was bound to get restless. He was bound to break his moorings. So he came home, back to the apartment, back to his old room, back to me. And that was when the shift began. The breakup didn't just hurt him. It seemed to fundamentally destabilize him. The easy confidence that had always been his armor was gone, replaced by a raw, frayed vulnerability I had never seen before. He was adrift, and without thinking, he tethered himself to the only stable thing he had left. He tethered himself to me. The first time it happened, it was nearly 2 in the morning, a week after he'd moved back in. I was in bed, reading, the small pool of light from my lamp a solitary island in the darkness. I heard his door creak open, then the soft shuffle of his footsteps in the hall. I expected him to go to the kitchen for water, but the footsteps stopped outside my door. My door was always open, a habit from college, from a decade of shared living. A closed door in our apartment meant something was wrong. An open door was the default state of being. He stood there for a long moment, just a silhouette in the dim hallway light. I pretended to be engrossed in my book, my heart starting a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. "Ethan." His voice was small. I looked up. "Yeah? You okay?" He shook his head, a barely perceptible movement in the shadows. "Can't sleep. Mind just won't shut up. Want to talk." It was our old script, the one we'd used for years. But he deviated from it. Instead of retreating to the living room, he walked into my room. He didn't turn on the light. He just came and sat on the far edge of my mattress, his back to me, his shoulders slumped. The bed dipped, and the small, contained world of my lamplight suddenly included him. It felt like a breach of some unspoken treaty, a crossing of a border we had always tacitly respected. My room was my space, his was his. The living room was our shared ground. This was new. He started talking. About Sarah. About his job. About the gnawing feeling of failure that was eating him alive. I didn't offer advice. I just listened, my book forgotten in my lap. I was acutely aware of his physical presence, of the 3 feet of mattress that separated us, a distance that felt both immense and non-existent. After 20 minutes of a low, rambling monologue, he fell silent. The only sound was the hum of the city outside my window. He didn't move. He just sat there, a heavy, sad weight on the edge of my bed, and I stayed perfectly still, afraid that any movement would break the spell and send him retreating back into his own lonely room. Eventually, his breathing deepened, and his head lolled to one side. He had fallen asleep, sitting up. Gently, I reached out and touched his shoulder. He startled, his head snapping up. "Sorry," he mumbled, scrubbing a hand over his face. "I should go." He stood up and walked to the door, and for a second, I thought that was it. A strange, one-time occurrence. But he stopped in the doorway, his hand on the frame, and looked back at me. "Thanks, man," he said, and his voice was filled with a gratitude so profound it almost hurt to hear. Seriously, then he was gone, and I was left alone in the sudden, ringing silence, the indentation of his weight still visible on my comforter. That was the beginning of the ritual. The next night, he did the same thing, but this time, he didn't just sit on the edge. He leaned back against the wall, stretching his long legs out across the foot of my bed. A few nights later, he laid down, on top of the covers, his head pillowed on his arm, his body a rigid line perpendicular to mine. He'd talk until his words slurred with exhaustion, and then he would fall into a fitful sleep. I would lie awake for hours, listening to him breathe, terrified to move, to disturb this fragile, new ecosystem we were building. I studied the architecture of his sleeping form, the way his hand curled by his face, the slow rise and fall of his chest. I was an astronomer discovering a new planet, charting its terrain, memorizing its atmosphere, knowing all the while that I could never, ever land there. The anxiety was a constant companion. Every night, I'd lie in bed, my body tense, waiting. Would he come tonight? The sound of his door opening was a starting pistol, setting my heart racing. The internal monologue was relentless, a circular debate with no resolution. What does this mean? He's just grieving. He needs a friend. Don't read into it. But he's never done this before. This is different. He's blurring a line. No, you're blurring the line. He's just seeking comfort. You're the one making it something else. You're the one who is going to ruin everything. It was exhausting. My own apartment, my own bed, had ceased to be a place of rest. It was a stage, and I was an actor in a play where I didn't know my lines, my motivation, or the final scene. The night he finally slipped under the covers was the night a storm rolled through the city. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled a low, mournful song. He'd come in, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, his face pale in the flashes of lightning. He laid on top of the comforter as usual, but he was shivering, a fine tremor running through his body. He claimed it was the cold, but I knew it was more than that. It was a soul-deep chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "I'm freezing," he whispered, his teeth chattering slightly. I didn't know what to say. The space under my comforter felt like a sacred, inviolable territory. To invite him in felt like a monumental act, a concession I might not be able to come back from. But to leave him there, shivering on top of the blankets, felt impossibly cruel. My desire to comfort him won out over my instinct for self-preservation. It always did. "Get in, you idiot," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, and then he slid under the covers. He was still in his jeans and a t-shirt, and he stayed on the very edge of the mattress, as far from me as he could get while still being in the bed. He turned his back to me immediately, curling into a tight ball. The heat coming off his body was immense, a furnace of anxiety. I stayed on my side, my own body rigid, my hands clenched into fists at my side. We lay there, back to back, two separate islands of misery, with a vast, turbulent ocean of unspoken things flowing between us. The air was so thick with tension, I felt like I could barely breathe. I was so close to the one thing I wanted more than anything in the world, and yet we had never felt farther apart. From then on, that became the new normal. Every night, he would come to my room and get into my bed. He always kept his back to me. It was his silent way of maintaining the boundary, of making it clear that this was about proximity, not intimacy. It was a platonic arrangement, a sleepover between friends, a temporary solution to a temporary problem. I told myself these things over and over, a mantra to keep the hope from growing wild and strangling me. But it was a losing battle, because sometimes, in the middle of the night, he would shift in his sleep. His arm would brush against mine. His leg would tangle with my own. And once, just once, I woke up to find he had rolled over, his face just inches from mine, his breath a warm, soft puff against my cheek. I lay there, paralyzed, until the sun began to stream through the blinds. And just before he woke up, I carefully, silently, rolled away, erasing the evidence of a closeness he would never remember. Each night was a form of exquisite torture. I was living in a state of suspended reality, a dream from which I knew I would eventually have to wake. I was a curator in a museum of a love that only existed in my own head, carefully preserving these moments of accidental intimacy, cataloging the weight of his head on the pillow next to mine, the sound of his breathing in the dark. I was terrified. I was terrified of him leaving, of him getting better and not needing me anymore. And I was terrified of him staying, of this ritual continuing indefinitely, slowly eroding my sanity until there was nothing left of me but this aching, cavernous want. I was trapped between two impossible futures, and the present was a razor's edge. Which brought us to tonight. The night he finally broke the unspoken rule and turned to face me. The night he built a beautiful, fragile bridge of words about comfort and ease, and then burned it to the ground with four simple, careless words. "I could never kiss you." He delivered the line and then fell silent, his eyes searching mine, completely oblivious to the devastation he had just wrought. He was waiting for me to agree, to nod, to confirm the safety of our platonic haven. He was waiting for me to say, "Of course not, man. We're friends," but the words wouldn't come. The part of me that had always been so good at playing my role, at protecting him from my own messy, inconvenient heart, was gone. It had been shattered, and all that was left was the raw, bleeding truth of my feelings. In the silence, his expression shifted from placid certainty to a flicker of confusion. He saw something in my eyes, some tectonic shift that he couldn't name. A small furrow appeared between his eyebrows. "Ethan," he whispered, his voice tentative. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My body was moving before my brain had a chance to veto the decision. It was a slow, deliberate motion, closing the small gap between us. It felt like moving through water, every inch a monumental effort against the pressure of a decade of restraint. I watched his eyes widen, a dawning awareness, a flicker of alarm. His breath hitched. I could see the protest forming on his lips. "What are you doing?" That would have stopped me. That would have saved us. But I didn't give him the chance to say it. I leaned in and pressed my lips to his. It was not a good kiss. It was clumsy and desperate, and born of a grief so profound it felt like a physical illness. It was the kiss of a drowning man, not seeking pleasure, but air. My lips were dry, his were slack with surprise. For a full second, nothing happened. He was completely still, a statue, and in that frozen moment, A wave of cold, sickening dread washed over me. I've done it. I've ruined everything. This is the end. I started to pull back, the shame and regret so potent it tasted like acid in my throat. My entire life with him, our friendship, our history, our home, all of it was incinerating in the space of this one catastrophic miscalculation. But then something shifted. Just as I began to retreat, his hand, which had been lying limp between us, came up and rested on the back of my neck. It wasn't a push. It wasn't a rejection. His fingers were hesitant at first. Then they curled gently into my hair, holding me there. And his lips, which had been unresponsive, softened. He kissed me back. It was tentative, questioning. It was the furthest thing from the passionate, cinematic kisses I had sometimes allowed myself to imagine. This was something quieter, something more fragile, and infinitely more terrifying. It was a question being asked in a language neither of us knew how to speak. His other hand came up to my chest, his palm flat against my furiously beating heart, as if he were trying to read its frantic, panicked rhythm. The kiss deepened slightly, a slow, exploratory pressure that sent a tremor through my entire body. I could feel the confusion in it, the uncertainty, but underneath it all, there was something else. A flicker of response. A current of reciprocity that I had never, in my wildest dreams, allowed myself to believe was possible. It lasted for maybe 10 seconds, a small eternity in which the entire universe was rewritten. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. He broke the kiss, pulling back abruptly, his hand dropping from my neck as if it had been burned. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else, something that looked terrifyingly like fear. The space between us, which moments before had been filled with a fragile, impossible connection, was now a gaping chasm. He scrambled backwards, away from me, until his back hit the wall with a soft thud. He didn't say a word. He just stared, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his face a pale mask in the gloom. I couldn't breathe. The silence in the room was a living entity. It was loud, accusatory, suffocating. I had crossed the line. I had taken his grief and his vulnerability, and I had twisted it into something for myself. I had been selfish. I had been reckless. I had destroyed the one good, pure thing in my life. The shame was so absolute it felt like it was going to swallow me whole. Liam. I managed to choke out, my voice a broken rasp. I'm sorry. I don't know why. He shook his head, a sharp, jerky movement. He still hadn't spoken. He looked trapped, like a wild animal caught in a snare. He pushed himself off the bed, stumbling in his haste. He backed away towards the door, his eyes never leaving mine, as if he was afraid I would lunge for him again. At the doorway, he paused, his hand gripping the frame so tightly his knuckles were white. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. He just shook his head one last time, a look of profound, unreadable turmoil on his face, and then he was gone. I heard his bedroom door click shut down the hall. A sound of finality, a sound of separation. I was left alone in my bed, the echo of his lips still on mine. The room felt huge and cold and empty. The ritual was broken. The sanctuary had been defiled. I had taken our silent, unspoken agreement and shattered it into a million pieces. He had said, I could never kiss you, and when I had, he hadn't stopped me. But in the end, it didn't matter. The result was the same. He had run, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that he would never be coming back. I had finally, irrevocably, made myself alone. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over again in my mind. Each replay a fresh wave of self-loathing. I analyzed every microsecond of it. The way he froze, the hesitation in his touch, the way he kissed back, and the way he fled. It was a contradictory mess of signals that I couldn't untangle. Had he kissed me back out of shock, pity, or had there been something real in it? A flicker of genuine response that his conscious mind had immediately panicked and extinguished? The not knowing was a special kind of hell. When the sun came up, I heard him moving around the apartment. The quiet, Familiar sounds of our morning routine, the coffee maker gurgling, the fridge door opening and closing, were now freighted with a new, unbearable tension. I stayed in my room, a prisoner in my own home. The thought of facing him, of seeing the accusation or, worse, the pity in his eyes, was more than I could bear. I heard the front door open and close. He was gone. He'd left for work without a word, without the usual tap on my door and the offer of a mug of coffee. The silence he left behind was deafening. The entire day was a fog of anxiety. I tried to work, to edit the photos from a wedding I'd shot over the weekend, but the smiling faces of the happy couple seemed to mock me. I couldn't focus. My apartment, once my haven, felt hostile. Every object held a memory of him. The worn spot on the couch where he always sat. The stupid, chipped mug he loved. The scent of his shampoo lingering in the bathroom. He was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I felt like a ghost in my own life. I spent the day steeling myself for the inevitable conversation. He would come home, and we would have to talk. He would tell me it was a mistake, that he was confused and grieving, and that our friendship was too important to lose, but that things had to go back to the way they were. He would build the wall between us back up, higher and stronger than before, and I would have to help him, brick by painful brick. I rehearsed my lines. I would be gracious. I would be understanding. I would take all the blame. I would do whatever it took to salvage the wreckage, to piece together some semblance of the friendship I had so carelessly broken. He came home late. I heard his keys in the lock, the weary sigh as he dropped his bag by the door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat on the couch, my hands clenched in my lap, waiting for him to come into the living room to start the trial. But he didn't. I heard him go straight to his room and close the door. This time, the click was like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. An hour passed, then two. The sun went down. The apartment grew dark, and I didn't turn on any lights. I just sat there, in the gloom, listening to the silence from his room. This was worse than a confrontation. This was avoidance. This was him erasing me, erasing what had happened. The hurt, which had been a sharp, acute pain, began to curdle into a dull, frustrated anger. Anger at him for his cowardice, but mostly anger at myself. I had let this go on for a decade. I had lived in the shadows of his life, accepting whatever scraps of attention he threw my way, and for what? To be treated like a shameful secret? To be hidden away in the dark? Something inside me snapped. The patient, quiet observer was done observing. I stood up, my legs stiff, and walked down the short hallway to his room. His door was closed. A solid, wooden barrier. For years, my door had been open to him, a silent invitation. His was now shut to me. I raised my hand and knocked. It was a loud, sharp rap that surprised even me with its forcefulness. There was no answer. "Liam," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk." Silence. "I'm not leaving," I said, pressing my forehead against the cool wood of the door. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to hide from me. Not after last night." I heard a muffled sound from inside, a frustrated sigh. Then footsteps. The lock turned, and the door opened a few inches. He was standing there, backlit by the lamp in his room. He looked exhausted, his face drawn and pale. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at a spot on the wall over my shoulder. "There's nothing to talk about," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "It was a mistake. Let's just forget it happened, forget it happened." The words were a slap. "You think I can just forget it happened?" "Liam, you kissed me back. I was tired," he said quickly, defensively. I was confused. "You caught me off guard. That's not what it felt like." I pushed, my voice rising. I felt a desperate need to make him acknowledge it, to make him admit that it wasn't just me. "It felt like you were there. It felt like you were present." He finally looked at me then, and his eyes were full of a desperate, panicked anger. "What do you want me to say, Ethan? What is it you want to hear? That I'm gay? Is that it? Because I'm not. Okay, I'm not. I love Sarah. I've only ever been with women." His words were a frantic denial, a desperate attempt to shore up the walls of his own identity. He was talking more to himself than to me. But the denial, the vehemence of it, still stung. "I never said you were," I said quietly, my anger deflating, leaving only a hollow ache. "I'm just asking you to be honest with me." About last night. About all of this. I gestured vaguely between us, at the hallway, at my open bedroom door. This ritual. You, in my bed every night. You have to know that's not normal. You have to know what that felt like for me. He flinched, a visible recoiling, as if my words were a physical threat. It didn't mean anything, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. I didn't want to be alone. You're my best friend. That's all it was. You're the one who made it weird. I made it weird. I let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. Liam, you're the one who came to my bed every single night for 2 months. You're the one who sought out comfort in a way you never have before. I didn't invent that. I just reacted to it. I finally reacted. My voice cracked on the last word, the raw hurt of it all finally breaking through. I have been in love with you for 10 years, I whispered, the confession falling into the charged space between us. It was the first time I had ever said it aloud. The words felt foreign and terrifying and liberating all at once. I have sat by and watched you with woman after woman, and I have never said a word. I have been your rock, your constant, your safe place. And last night, for one stupid, insane second, I thought maybe I had misread everything. Maybe the safety went both ways. He stared at me, his face ashen. The anger was gone, replaced by a look of stunned, wide-eyed horror. He looked like I had just spoken in an alien language, one he could not possibly comprehend. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He was completely, utterly speechless. The confession hung in the air, a terrible, beautiful, destructive thing. I had laid my entire heart at his feet, and he was just staring at it, as if it were a piece of ordnance that might explode at any moment. He started, his voice a choked whisper. I can't, he shook his head again, a gesture of complete negation. I can't do this, and with that, he closed the door in my face. The click of the lock sliding into place was the most definitive sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of an ending. I stood there in the hallway for a long time. The imprint of his shocked face burned into my memory. I had told him the truth, the whole, unvarnished, decade-long truth, and it had sent him running for cover. I had given him my heart, and he had locked the door. The next few days were a Cold War fought in 60 square meters of shared living space. We moved around each other like ghosts, two celestial bodies whose orbits had been violently disrupted, now spinning off in opposite directions. The silence was an active, malevolent force in the apartment. It absorbed sound. It warped the light. It made the air thick and hard to breathe. We communicated through necessity only. A clipped, I'm using the shower. A muttered, your takeout is on the counter. We didn't make eye contact. We existed in parallel universes, separated by a thin wall of drywall and a chasm of unspoken, catastrophic feeling. His door remained closed. It became a symbol of our new reality, a monument to the line I had crossed and the boundary he had been forced to erect. My own door, which had been open for years, I now closed at night, not out of spite, but out of a desperate need for self-preservation. I couldn't bear to look at the empty doorway, at the space he used to fill. Closing the door was an act of surrender, an admission that the ritual was over, that whatever strange, liminal space we had inhabited was gone for good. I spent most of my time out of the apartment. I took on extra work. I went for long, aimless walks through the city, my camera hanging and used around my neck. The world seemed to have been drained of its color. Everything looked flat, two-dimensional. The joy I used to find in capturing a fleeting expression or a perfect slant of light was gone. All I could see was the gulf between people, the infinite spaces of misunderstanding that separated them. The nights were the worst. Sleep offered no escape. I'd lie in my bed, in the crushing silence of my now solitary room, and the memory of his weight beside me was a phantom limb, an ache that was both real and imagined. I missed him. I missed my friend. Beneath the layers of romantic love and unrequited yearning, there was the simple, bedrock truth of our friendship. He was my person, and I had lost him. The pain of that was a deeper, more profound wound than the sting of rejection. I had gambled with the most precious thing I had, and I had lost everything. A week after the confrontation, I came home late from a shoot to find him in the kitchen. He was standing at the counter, staring into a mug of what I assumed was tea, his shoulders hunched. He didn't seem to have heard me come in. He looked diminished. The vibrant, life of the party energy that was so intrinsic to him was gone. He looked like a photograph that had been left out in the sun. All his colors faded to a pale, washed-out version of what they once were. He must have sensed my presence, because he looked up, and for the first time in a week, his eyes met mine. They were red-rimmed and exhausted. He looked like he hadn't slept any more than I had. The silence stretched between us, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't angry or accusatory. It was just sad. A heavy, shared grief for what we had broken. "I can't do this anymore, Ethan," he said, his voice quiet and hoarse. "This silence. It's killing me." I leaned against the doorframe, my own exhaustion a heavy cloak on my shoulders. I know. He ran a hand through his already messy hair, a gesture of deep frustration. "I've been thinking about what you said." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I've been a complete and utter bastard to you. And I'm sorry." The apology, so simple and direct, disarmed me completely. I had been prepared for more denials, more justifications. "Not this." "Okay," I said softly, not trusting myself to say more. "I was scared," he admitted, his gaze dropping back to his mug. "What you said, it felt like it threatened everything I thought I knew about myself. About us." My first instinct was to just deny it, to push it away as hard as I could. "To push you away." He looked up at me again, and there was a raw, painful honesty in his eyes. "That kiss. It scared the hell out of me, Ethan. Not because it was you, but because, for a second, I didn't hate it, and I didn't know what to do with that. It didn't fit into any of the boxes I've built for my life. My heart, which I thought had been permanently numbed, gave a painful throb. He wasn't confessing love. He wasn't giving me the fairy tale ending. He was just being honest, and it was more than I had ever allowed myself to hope for. He was confused and lost, and wrestling with something he had never had to confront before. And instead of running, he was finally turning to face it. "I think," he started, then stopped, searching for the words. "I think Sarah was right. I've always been waiting for something. I just thought it would be a different person, a better job, a bigger apartment. I never thought it might be a different feeling. A feeling I wasn't allowing myself to have." He shook his head, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "All those nights, in your room, I told myself it was about not being alone. And that was true. But it was more than that. It wasn't just any company I wanted. It was yours. I felt safe with you, in a way I never felt with anyone else. Not even her." He took a step towards me, then another, until he was standing in front of me. He was close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. He looked terrified and resolute all at once. "I don't know what I am, Ethan. I don't know what this means. My whole life, I've been following this map that everyone else gave me, and you just showed me that maybe I'm in a completely different country than I thought I was. And I don't have a map for this place." He reached out, his hand hovering in the air between us for a moment before he gently, tentatively, took my hand. His fingers were warm, his grip uncertain but firm. "But I don't want to be silent anymore. And I don't want to lose my best friend because I'm too scared to figure out my own shit." He squeezed my hand. Can we just start there? No more silence." Tears I hadn't even realized were forming pricked at the back of my eyes. I blinked them back, my throat tight with a wave of emotion so overwhelming it almost buckled my knees. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise of a future. It was something far more valuable. It was a beginning, an honest beginning. It was him choosing to stay, to face the confusion, to walk into the uncharted territory with me. I squeezed his hand back. "Yeah," I whispered. No more silence that night. We didn't end up in the same bed. We didn't need to. We sat on the couch, side by side, our shoulders occasionally brushing, and we talked. We talked for hours. We talked about our friendship, about the past 10 years, about all the things we had left unsaid. He asked me about my feelings for him, not with fear or revulsion, but with a quiet, genuine curiosity. He wanted to understand. I told him everything, the whole long, lonely story. And he just listened. He absorbed it all, his expression a mixture of awe and regret. It was like I was showing him a secret, hidden blueprint of our entire friendship, and he was seeing for the first time how all the pieces fit together. In return, he talked about his own confusion, his restlessness, the persistent feeling of performing a life rather than living it. He talked about the safety he felt with me, how it was the only place he could ever truly drop the act. We didn't solve anything. We didn't define what we were to each other now. We just laid all the broken pieces out on the table between us, together. When we finally went to bed, as the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn, he walked me to my door. It felt formal and strange. He stopped and looked at me, 100 different emotions flickering across his face. He leaned in, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was going to kiss me again. Instead, he just rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me." He went to his room, and I went to mine. And for the first time in a week, I closed my door and felt a sense of peace. The silence was no longer an enemy. It was just quiet, a calm, restful space. Because for the first time, I knew that on the other side of the door, he wasn't hiding. He was just there, and that was enough. The weeks that followed were a process of careful, deliberate reconstruction. We were architects of a new kind of relationship, learning its stresses and load-bearing walls. The easy, unthinking physicality of our old friendship was gone, replaced by a new, intentional tenderness. A hand on the small of my back as we passed in the kitchen, his leg resting against mine on the couch as we watched a movie. Each touch was a conscious choice, a quiet affirmation. It was slow, and it was patient. It was him learning a new language, and me, finally having someone to speak it with. The ritual of the night returned, but it was transformed. One night, a month or so after our talk, I found him standing in my open doorway again. He looked hesitant, uncertain. He wasn't running from a nightmare anymore. He was walking toward something. I just looked at him and patted the empty space on the mattress beside me. An invitation, not a rescue. He came in and slid under the covers, and this time, he turned to face me. He didn't say anything. He just reached out and took my hand in the dark, lacing his fingers through mine. We fell asleep like that, our hands clasped between us, a silent, unbreakable bridge. Our first real kiss, the one that wasn't born of desperation or confusion, happened on a rainy Sunday afternoon. We were in the living room, the air warm and humid, the sound of the rain a gentle percussion against the window pane. I was reading on the couch, and he was sitting on the floor, leaning against my knees, scrolling through something on his phone. It was a scene of quiet, domestic bliss that felt so normal, so right. It made my heart ache with its simple beauty. He went quiet, his phone forgotten in his lap. He tilted his head back and looked up at me, his expression soft and serious. "Ethan," he said. "Yeah." "Would it be okay," he started, his voice barely a whisper, "if I kissed you? For real this time?" And in that moment, all the years of waiting, all the pain and the loneliness, it all just dissolved. It evaporated into the warm, rainy air, leaving behind only this. Only him. Only now. I leaned down, and he met me halfway. And we kissed. It was slow, and it was sure. It was a conversation, a promise, and a homecoming, all at once. It was the beautiful, honest silence we had finally learned to create together. We had found our way out of the dark, not by ignoring it, but by walking through it, hand in hand. The door was no longer a barrier or a question mark. It was just a way into a room where we could both, finally, be at peace.